Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. It's another one in our Zoom series of interviews where we've been speaking to some amazing minds, be it coaches, be it players, be it administrators in football. We've kind of been touching every corner of the footballing map with our discussion series. And today is no different. Joining me, I have Ashford Mamelodi, who's a football administrator working between Africa and Zurich and many other parts of the world throughout his 30-year plus career in football administration. So thank you so much for your time and for joining me this afternoon to kind of just unbundle the status of football administration. Some of the bodies you are well versed in are going to come up in this discussion, but let's start with you and your journey as far as football administration is concerned. You started out as a footballer, but left the career at the tender age of 25. Why?
That's correct, Kamza. I left because I was just of the view that, well, at the club that I was playing for at the time, my general view of how football was being run at the time, I then decided it was not being run properly, and maybe my energies would be better served helping those who are trying to run it.
Okay, you say that. Was that opportunity waiting for you when you got out, or did you have to kind of fashion one for yourself? Were there people willing to listen to you and say, "Okay, we like the way you think. Come on board"?
Well, I went into the deep end. I just swam with the tide. Obviously, I learned the trade very, very quickly. I started even with my own club itself, trying to help out here and there. And in no time, perhaps because football administration at the time was generally so poor, I became an easy sell to other football structures. I remember running a regional football association first, and in no time being called up to serve on the National Executive Committee of the Botswana Football Association. So it was a roller coaster ride, but yeah. I thoroughly enjoyed it. That's what came out. I was worried whether I'd enjoy it, but I was enjoying it. And one thing led to the next.
Okay. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it all as far as football administration is concerned. What would you say is the current status of it on the continent? Because, stories are always abound about how a lot of federations are in trouble and people need to get involved that are external. How do you kind of see the current state of play?
Well, I'm retired now, and therefore I'm able to look at things with a wider perspective.
Yeah.
My view is that football on the continent is crying out for help. All is not well, and I don't think it's any leader would stand up and say, no, everything is perfect. There are serious problems in our football that need some urgent attention.
What do you think we've gotten so wrong? What's the stumbling block? You've had a 30-year plus career. I'm sure at moments you saw things changing and thinking, finally, we might be getting this right, only for that to be undone again. What's the problem? Why is there no consistency? Why have we not attained a target and remained there?
Well, you see, Kamza, if you look at the continent, I can only speak in general terms. I mean, I've never served at the level of CAF. But while I was still at FIFA, the number of countries I visited, even while I was still General Secretary of Safa, which is a regional body, I think the biggest issue comes for me is lack of good governance. That I think is where the wheels come off.
Right.
We've got top level coaches, we've got top level players. But when it's now time to manage all that, I think that this is where we have a serious deficiency in my view, because it cut across almost every country that I've had any semblance of dealings with.
Okay, but you say that a coach doesn't provide results, he gets fired. A player doesn't provide results, he gets put on the bench. What's happening in terms of these administrators not meeting the targets and somehow not feeling the effects of it. I mean, if you're not performing, you should be out of a job. Why are we not seeing the best of the best in these positions helping turn the tide?
From my assessment, Kamza, also an administration instructor
Mm,
and administration and management instructor, I think that the problem is, while a lot of investment has gone into, the technical elements of football,
mm,
regrettably, we have not given anywhere near as similar level resources to
mm,
development of leaders. It's just assumed, Kamza, if you played it once upon a time, or if you have been, following a particular team, that immediately qualifies you
mm.
to get into the management bracket. I think this is where we lost it.
Okay.
And of course, FIFA over the years, including CAF, have now been trying very hard to develop administrators. Unfortunately, those who are in the leadership and who probably need this more are the ones generally who are more reluctant to get into a classroom and learn.
Right.
You have this very, very delicate imbalance rather, where, the people who really need to be tutored or who need to be engaged in elements of leadership assume that they know it. And I think this is where perhaps, a lot of work needs to be devoted.
Okay, so you're saying that people might be able to look the part and act the part, but when it comes to the delivery, no one's looking at that self-development aspect and component. On that note, there's a term that gets bandied about, which is club licensing. And for me, it kind of represents the set of standards that one should be trying to attain. When you look at things like that, not being adhered to on the continent, at club level, and obviously, it can work both ways in terms of how it filters. Are simple fixes like that what we need to be perhaps looking at, or do you think the problems are a lot more endemic? Should we just have a benchmark that everyone operates at, and then that can help us get the standard up, or do you think the problems run deeper than that?
I think they probably run deeper than that, Kamza, because it's the principles that I think we are missing. For example, you take an average MA president, federation president in Africa.
Yeah.
The biggest delivery is he is measured.
Yeah.
His performance management is based on the success of the national team.
Right.
Now, while that may to some be reasonable, it could also be unreasonable, because what it does then, it gets him to focus primarily on the senior national team,
right,
and missing essential steps that have to be carried out in the lower levels of development.
Right.
So we have this pressure game as well, that look, you are the president, we now need our national team to deliver. Whereas if I got into a similar position like that, I would invest even the entire first term in structures, in your development structure, women's football. Make sure that whoever comes in after me, the foundation has already been laid out, right, so that he quickly gets to the pressure point. National teams are pressure points, and we know that. But sometimes I think it's unfair. In the same way that it doesn't necessarily mean when a team underperforms, it's necessarily the coach.
Right.
Sometimes it's very much goes back to the leadership. The coach is being put under undue pressure. He's probably not adequately resourced.
Right.
And consequently, he fails to deliver. So he's assisted to fail, if you like.
Right. Who created this unrealistic standard then? Because you speak of it, but if I look overseas, you're right. A lot of people will then go into, making sure that the structures beneath them can propel the energy and the mood forward and upwards in terms of starting with development and seeing the benefits with the senior national team. So who created the standard? Why are we holding ourselves to it when it shows best practice around the world that that's not how you do it?
I'm happy that you mentioned best practice, and you're right. In Europe, it's totally a different ball game. I think what we need to do in this very, this beloved continent of ours is to just go back to the drawing boards.
Mm.
Make sure that, we take care of the basics in developing this game. Make sure that we look at the important elements of development and not rush to results. Because, you can take it even to an average club on the continent. It's how quickly you get the league honors. Nobody worries about the rest of the infrastructure that is supposed to be backing you. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I just think all it needs is the leadership of the game on the continent to sit down, look at priority areas, look at themselves and say, look, do I have the wherewithal to run this game at club level, at regional level, at national level? Where am I lacking? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And prioritize that for me, I think if that happened, then the problem would be, somewhat less that appears to be currently.
Okay, and then prior to COVID-19 kind of locking down the entire world, where do you think we were? Were we stagnant? Were there improvements? Was it a downward trajectory? Because I guess in this time, we've all had a moment to pause and reflect. What would your musings be about African football administration in general?
Well, I think African football, like everywhere else in the world, that was really hit by the pandemic comes up. We suffered a blow that nobody actually understood. And I think the effects of COVID-19 will be felt well beyond even 2020.
Right.
You get into even professional leagues on the continent, for example. It's not like there are reserves out there that will look after, players, wages as they become available. And you're talking about livelihoods here, where we are unable to take care of a player simply because we haven't got the money rolling in as it would under normal circumstances. So I think the only good thing about COVID-19 is I hope it has given leaders on the continent, leaders of football, an opportunity to reflect. You couldn't do anything during lockdown. You could do very little.
Right.
But for me, it's an opportunity individually to reflect and say, how could we do things better? And I think those leaders who did, those sports leaders who did, are more likely to make noticeable and positive changes going forward.
Okay, let's then come back home to the southern tip of the continent, where you had your time with Safa, back when South Africa was still kind of coming to terms with its, liberation and post '94. How did that whole relationship begin with you and the likes of Solomon Sticks Morewa? Just take us back to that journey of COSAFA, then help using your brain and your expertise to help the likes of Safa and that union.
Well, yes, you're right. I was, very much involved in the southern part of Africa, especially through COSAFA, where I was the general secretary, and I did meet Mr. Morewa, may his soul rest in peace. There was a great deal of excitement with the doors reopening for South Africa,
right?
Because we knew we had a giant in the south, and from a Southern African perspective, it was really going to bolster us to have, Big Brother suddenly coming into the fray. We're talking about a country that played professional football even before democracy.
Right.
There was professional football. And it doesn't come as a surprise that post 1996, when they won the AFCON, a lot of players were suddenly farmed out or, bought out into Europe.
Yes.
It was to be expected. And that for me was a measure of how big the country is, because we're talking about quite a good number of players.
Sure.
And as a result of that, it made the national team stronger, or it is supposed to have.
Yeah. And what was that? Was that just like, a blip? Because replicating it has been very difficult. We had the win, then we came up as runners up, and then, it's pretty much been forgettable ever since. What do you think that's down to? It fizzled out all very quickly if we're talking over a couple of years?
For me, it was actually a shock,
Mm,
because, the expectations were quite high. And you're right. For a long time, I think right up to now, the
mm,
graph has been pretty steep down
mm-hmm.
uh, after winning AFCON.
Yes.
Um, when one looks at it closely, I think what may have been omitted, um, you know, in the excitement of winning
Mm,
AFCON,
mm,
we need to be able to get the basics right. I really believe in the football pyramid that if you don't get the foundation
yeah.
solid,
Right.
correct, you're never really going to make it at the elite levels.
Mm,
You're always going to be found wanting.
mm,
Okay. And it's not actually, and I know that in your country, in South Africa, over the years, you've had a lot of youth competitions.
mm,
For me, it goes beyond competitions.
mm,
Development is actually, nurturing that young player
right.
to become what he should become.
Yes.
So I don't think there has been adequate resources invested in development itself.
Mm,
It's been very exciting to see quite a number of your top clubs actually having academies. It's
right.
actually a very positive start because that's what's been missing
Okay.
for a very long time. But I think even at the national level, we need to see this pyramid. Agree that we've got the foundation solid.
Mm,
How do we sustain it?
yeah.
Because you always have boys and girls wanting to play football, but you need to have a plan of how you're going to see that is done and how it feeds into the different leagues. I think for me personally, I think this is perhaps where we may have taken our eyes slightly off the ball.
Right, right. I mean, you look at the overseas examples, the Belgian team for one, where and as Eden Hazard says, he will have played with Romelu Lukaku from when they were youngsters, and now they're playing side by side in the national team. There seems to be an understanding and patience in that this is a long-term process. How come, going back to best practice, we don't see that value and see it the same way?
Absolutely. And you give a good example of Belgium. These guys will have a national football philosophy.
Mm,
And I really think a lot of our countries on the continent must insist on identifying or
mm,
coming up with a national football philosophy.
right.
And at the end of the day, the biggest outcome from development is how well you perform at national team level, whether it's your under 17s, your under 20, how well you perform nationally or internationally at a national team level,
Mm,
and of course at top level as well.
mm.
So I think that's really what we really need to focus on. Do we have a philosophy? What is our philosophy? Is it being followed?
Yeah,
How do we get all the coaches on board?
yeah,
How do we make sure that the national team structure understands this philosophy from the technical director's point of view? You
right.
know what I mean?
Yes.
So I think these are things that, and I don't think we are far behind.
Mm,
I still believe we can't be too far behind having an African team performing well enough to get to the semi-finals of the World Cup.
right.
But I really think we've got to, the things that we perhaps think are not important, your governance
Yeah,
issues,
yeah.
your, uh, your football philosophy issues. I think if we get those right and package them correctly, then we'll be a far away.
Okay. Let's look at a body that's, I guess, just in the news right now. There's so much happening with the South African Football Association. They're obviously convened with the league to try and figure out a way of how to move forward the season and South African football under the duress of Corona. But at the same time, you have the sideshow that includes all the rumblings of former employees, some still within the structures, if you look at one game of Gwena. But it kind of detracts from the possible good work that could be coming out. What do you make of the current state of play of the South African Footballing Association?
Kamza, maybe I don't know enough to comment comfortably.
Mm,
Um, but I really think the few issues that you and I have talked about in this interview,
mm,
we really need to begin to look at issues of governance. say to ourselves, are we really applying it, to the extent that we should be applying it?
Right.
And no, I'm not talking just about the national level itself, because for me, I've seen this as a general African problem. In quite a number of our countries, we tend to not take good governance, as seriously as we should. And I'm not too sure what the problems are down south, but sometimes I wonder to myself whether we are not overlooking important elements such as good governance, and other elements of leadership. It's not only good governance; there are many things that are required in leadership. So it's a bit difficult for me to comment on that directly because, not being on the ground. But my little suspicion is that perhaps, on close analysis, these are some of the shortcomings that we could fix.
Yes.
And it would be a tragedy. I think we still look up to South African football as the leading big brother on the continent, and it would be tragic if it's already worrying that they don't seem to perform so well at the AFCON competitions.
Right.
But I think it would be even more worrying if the center can't hold.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
I hear you.
And then it'd be real cause for concern. But South Africa is a big country, and I believe if there are problems with their football, they've got the wherewithal to find the answers. They're unlike a small country that'll have to scratch its head for months. They've got the resources, they've got the people. It's not like, there aren't people out there who can do certain positions.
I mean, you're right. There's a human capital, but one of the known struggles of Safa is the actual financial capital. So how do you then balance that? How do you attract the top talent when the structure itself is struggling to attract anyone who wants to invest in it?
Well, I think it actually starts with us. If we can, correct ourselves, I don't think it would be that difficult to reach out. I mean, over the years, Safa has been, well, I can't say that I've been extremely wealthy. I'm not privy to their bank accounts.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the level of competitions that I have, entered, the size of the organization, the competitions that they've been able to run, suggests to us that they are not your average,
association.
African association. They're a big organization. They've got, and of course they're sitting in generally a much better economy than a lot of our countries,
Right.
And therefore, and you've got television that generally has been backing football in South Africa. So these are advantages that we really need to begin to harvest from. You know what I mean? So I really don't believe, and I don't know why. I've read about it that financially there are issues there, but one wonders why. You know what I mean? How that comes about. But if that is the problem, my view very strongly is that it can be fixed.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
You can't say that in almost all our countries. In other countries, you really going to have to wonder for a long time how to fix it.
Yes, yeah, you're saying their problems run deeper than what's at the superficial level. Okay, let's talk football administration 101 then. I mean, if I'm a young person kind of feeling like how you felt at 25, that there's a change to be made. I mean, what's the way? It seems so politicized. It seems so, almost buddy in that, you have to know someone to be involved and you have to kind of kowtow to whatever they want. There's power plays and dynamics that we don't often see as the public that would normally scare someone away. So how do you then convince a youngster to say, go in there, get involved and try do something?
Comes out through COSAFA, I've had the opportunity to run quite a number of admin and management courses in South Africa.
Yeah,
I think there've been a couple in East London, Durban, Polokwane, I think Joburg as well. And I've been amazed at the amount of talent, both men and women,
right.
Who I can see if they are ushered into a club structure regional structures of the game, they could grow.
Mm.
So I really don't think it's a question of not having the qualities. It's in abundance. I mean, the classes that I've engaged with, I've really been impressed
Yes.
with the cover. But you're right. Your point is now how do they? I would want to encourage them to not to despair,
Uh-huh.
and perhaps appeal to the sporting authorities, football included, that look, how do we open up for these youngsters? How do we make sure that maybe through a club licensing system,
Yeah.
we look for certain qualities to
Right.
enter our clubs and consequently our LFAs, and finally our regional structures all the way up to the national structure. I
Right.
think we've got to. This is we're harvesting, but we need to know what to do with what we harvest.
Right.
And what you're raising is another problem, not only in South Africa. Believe you me, there are people in other parts of the continent who have the same issue. That what, we'd love administration, but we just get lost in the process. Somebody doesn't like us. That's it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's because these youngsters come in and want to bring about change.
Of course.
And if you on the other side are not open to change management, then there are issues there.
Of course.
And that goes back to my earlier point that I made, comes that are we adequately empowered to be sitting in these positions? Do we subscribe to good governance? What are our leadership qualities like? I think these things ought to be brought under scrutiny in order, in the long run, to protect the game.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Okay, so looking at the future of the game, I'm looking at this committee that's been set up by Safa and the PSL to kind of figure out a way forward. There's always been almost a power dynamic between these two bodies, the local football league being the cash cow when it comes to soccer in the country, and Safa being the body that they are trying to have some sort of influence over that. Is that a workable situation? And who would you say is a good model where you see a good amount of harmony between the FA and its local league, professional league?
For me, and the problem you're raising, Kamza, has been there for quite a while. My prayer is that if these two bodies could find each other, it'll football in South Africa the world of good, because you've got a top-notch professional league and the envy of almost every country on the continent, I think.
Right.
And there's a lot to learn from. My view is that these two structures, I mean, obviously the South African Football Association is the mother body, and the PSL, or the structure of the league, affiliates to the mother body. And that's a relationship you can't interfere with because it comes all the way from FIFA.
Right.
And FIFA would insist upon it. But that does not mean to say we cannot coexist. Allow the professional wing to run their business, because the main body is charged with all these other challenges, your national teams, development, women's football. So if everybody did their bit without us forgetting, who we report to, I think we can find each other. I think the organizations can find each other.
Do you think there's a mistrust between them? Do you think there's a mistrust between Safa and the PSL?
I'm not too sure. I really don't want to put my neck out there and say there's a mistrust. I can't actually prove it, but I'm very much aware, given your news reports that come out of the country, that for a long time, I mean, I'm talking about even during Stix Brewer's time, right? Who was a close buddy of mine, and we could talk. There were problems, and my view is that they shouldn't be. They shouldn't be. I think if we are clear that, look, this is your part of the cake, that's your responsibility, run with it. And hands off. We just let them to run with it. And then there is so much that the national body has to do, that I think if we started compartmentalizing football in that fashion, you'd find that we would actually, improve.
Yeah, get things done.
we get things done.
Mm.
And in South Africa, I see a country, for me, I've always said even to my friends that, look, I believe, I believe in South Africa, we've got a team that could, perhaps the African team that could reach, close to the World Cup finals.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, if there's going to be an African country well positioned to get us to the World Cup finals, it's got to be South Africa. But we have to then reorganize ourselves.
Right.
We have to organize. We have to deal with. We mustn't skirt over issues. If there's an issue on the table, and I'm happy that you said there's a committee. I hope the committee actually goes deep and really finds where the core issues are.
Well, I think that committee is more just kind of charged with an interim measure as far as local football is concerned. But you're right. You raise a good point that you want the harmony to exist long after this crisis, so that eventually, there's better blood between the two bodies.
Absolutely comes out. The potential is immense. A well-organized South African football would, the sky would be the limit.
Right.
Trust me.
Right. And then in terms of, Africa exporting players, you make a good point about the team in '96. A lot of them were based overseas. We don't see that as much now. As well, some people blame money coming into the game, that, listen, I get paid well enough here. Why would I go struggle in some cold league where I'm going to be playing third division football? Whereas the West Africans, and the North Africans will take that and will see it as a challenge to go and compete in those markets and try and make a name for themselves. So where do you stand on that in terms of, people always talk about Africa being the breadbasket and having enough resources to be self-sustainable, yet at the same time, if you want to box with the best, you kind of have to be playing in Serie A, in the EPL, in La Liga. So where do you stand on the import and export of players?
You know what? I seem to admire the Egyptian, attitude generally, because there they try and hold as much as possible onto their top players.
Right.
I know that there are some Egyptians who are playing out there in Europe, Liverpool, etc. But in the past they've tried to hold on to. In other words, they've paid them well enough at club level.
Right.
Them not to be the attraction at the end of the day is what you earn abroad, isn't it? So if we can, this is why the development or allowing your professional league to blossom even further. I think when they label the teams to say, look, if a player is recruited to play in Belgium, they'll say, look, we'll offer you the same. Stay and play for us. You know what I mean?
But does that help the quality, though? Does that help the quality of the league? Does that help the player improve if they remain? How do you?
I think you see that it's not just an isolated thing of export of players. If we are busy working on ensuring that our leagues are competitive, are competitive, and we through club licensing and all other strategies, we ensure that we comply. Look, I think, yes, there will be a few very, very good players going out. We won't import substandard quality.
Right.
And that's another thing, because somehow if the players you bring into the country are not as good as the players you have.
Yeah.
And they are the ones who appear on Saturday and Sunday afternoon. That it ultimately affects the national team.
Right, of
course. Because the guys who should be scoring goals at the weekend are not scoring goals because foreign players are playing there.
Right.
I've got a problem with foreign players because I really think we need to only import what is real top-notch.
Right.
And not just, I wish in all our countries on the continent, we'd actually have a criteria that speaks to who can we bring in.
Right,
should
like
they
the
be
English do.
Yeah. Yeah, should they be national team players where they're playing, for example? I think we need to move towards that. Because in a few of our countries, my country as an example, Botswana, you sometimes find a lot of foreign players who are really not up to scratch, who are not bringing quality. But if you get a good quality foreign player, he's coming to add value. He's coming to improve the standard. Are you with me?
Yes.
So I think that's another dimension we need to look at very carefully. For me, I'd like quite a few of our players to stay on the continent, play in competitive leagues.
Yes.
They can't stay unless the leagues are competitive.
Sure.
And if the
Sure.
league can't pay them enough, then of course they'll end up going.
I'm a little worried. I don't know if there's much to be excited about in the future of our football administration. But what is the low hanging fruit? What are the easy wins, especially coming out of this whole COVID-19 mess? That, you know, if you were kind of consulting still and, you know, speaking to a club or a body, and they were saying, listen, we need to find, you know, things to build confidence in us as a body, and of course then attract investors and partners. What would your sage advice be to someone like that?
Well, you see, Kamza, that's true. But remember, first of all, somebody must want that assistance. Somebody
Yeah, I
call
get
for it.
ideal
Now,
situation they wanted. Let's start there. It's a
absolutely.
dream
Now,
situation, but let's see.
yeah, but I mean, if you were sitting in a position where, that can't be right, you know, because somehow you think the chair you sit on gives you the right and the power to do that, and then we have a problem. But for me, I think, like I said, I really expect people in leadership of sport generally, not just football, would have thought through things very carefully during the corona lockdown. I mean, it afforded us an opportunity to think.
Yes.
And comes when we come out of it, my view very strongly is, let's not allow ourselves to be pressurized. Let's try very hard to depoliticize, especially football. Football is
Yes.
highly political. We try very hard, whatever it takes. We look for strategies that will actually work towards that.
Uh-huh.
You know, so that we allow the game to grow, we allow our players to blossom, and we give them the correct type of environment. And we subscribe to simple things like good governance.
Yes.
You don't have to be a rocket scientist to subscribe to good governance. The problem is sometimes where we sit, you know, who can tell us to do? I mean, this is my show. This is my club. Who can dictate to me what to do? You know, if that attitude, you know, is stronger, then we're going to have a problem.
So is there a striving for excellence in your mind? Because I feel like you speak about good governance, in a sense, you know, it goes some way to exposing the deficiencies in the current structures. And so some people don't want to be caught out, especially on their watch, so to speak. So is there a hunger for good governance when the status quo, you know, keeps people who are in positions of power there already? I mean, you know, I don't know if there's an appetite. Have you seen one for good governance?
Well, I think we must not despair. We must rather work at you know, instruments like constitutions, you know, of national associations, constitutions of clubs, compliance, documentation that compels. I think once we start channeling energies in a certain direction, comes out, then I think we've got an opportunity at the end of it all to say, wow, we can get it right. I think we must just continue to persist in trying to get it right. And I think it comes from your administration and management courses. It comes from, you know, compliance at all levels of the game. Are we complying? If we are running academies, for example, are the academies properly registered?
Yes.
Are they complying to the requirements of the national body?
Yes.
You know, I think step by step, if we looked at all these components that make the game, my strong view is that there is hope. You know, I know there will be roadblocks along the way, but we've just got to take them head on, you know,
Sure.
and try and navigate,
right,
you know, through that quagmire. And at the end of the day, I think if we do that, we will get it right. And for me, countries like South Africa, the potential is frightening.
sure.
And really, if we get it right there, if we get it right there, believe you me, the whole continent will celebrate football in a very spectacular way.
Yeah, I think most football fans would love to us to be that blueprint and for us to get it right. And yeah, I hope that a lot more people share your sense of optimism. I don't know if the mood is the same on the ground, but in time we'll see. I mean, you point to the structures being there to kind of govern these institutions the right way, but as for the hunger to adopt all of that, I'm not sure I'm seeing it, but let's see. Time will tell. You saying that everyone's had the time to reflect and pause. Maybe we're going to come out of this whole situation a lot better for it. Sir, thank you so much. I really appreciated your time and your input as far as this discussion is concerned. And just lastly, your big prediction. How is football going to change after COVID-19? I mean, we're seeing what's happening in England, we're seeing what's happening in Germany on the ground in a literal sense. But what do you think is going to be the biggest mind shift after COVID-19 is tamed? Because it's not going away, but it just needs to be tamed.
It needs to be tamed. Look, the biggest tragedy I think that a lot of fans will have to deal with is, football in an empty stadium is not the same.
It's not, of course.
It's not the same. But I'm just thinking, football leaders should be wiser now. After this, not many people expected COVID-19 to come and hit the world of the game as badly as we've all been hit.
Sure.
It's not even just football.
Mm,
But I think we need to be wiser to understand that, look, when we are hit with something else, another virus, God forbid,
mm,
um, we'll be a little bit more wiser. Issues such as, you know, sustaining our players and other people who are employed through
mm,
the challenging times, we would have known better to strategize, make sure that some resources are available to mitigate the situation.
right.
So I really think I'm hoping that we're not just going to get out of it as soon as COVID-19 is gone and the fans are back in the stadium, we forget. I
Yes.
really think it's been a big lesson to everybody that, look, how do we mitigate against it next time? How do we make sure we survive through it?
Right.
Um, there are other countries on the continent, my country included, where it's been very challenging, where players just didn't have enough,
Mm,
to take home.
mm,
Situations were getting quite desperate.
mm,
Thankfully, like people like government came on board, but even then, it was really just to ease the pain,
mm,
not really
mm.
to
Relieve it.
compensate for.
Yeah.
So I think the game, it's a very big game, and we need to protect it in future in case this sort of pandemic hits us again. And it can happen.
No, for sure.
When Spanish came years ago, nobody thought something like this would come, but it's here with us now.
No, of course, of course. No, Mr. Mamelodi, thank you so much once again for your time. Really hope that some of your musings do come true. Because it would all be in the benefit of football all over the continent. So, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Kabza. It was a pleasure.